Set my thing. Okay. So this is Epistemological Limits in Quantum Realities, a Kantian analysis of QBism and relationalism by Arianna Lara Savelli, and it's in Philosophica Noticer. I don't know where that's out of. But yeah, as always, feel free to ask questions along the way. This is my first time reading it. I am not an expert in this stuff. I don't know a whole lot about this. So I'll do my best to answer them, but chat may know more than me this time. So yeah. Frank says, Prism is only a dilemma if you choose the points for each result carefully. It's true. It's like there's a lot of stuff that goes on with that. But like if you're in an HOA, you can think of how voting rights and, money distribution gets spent so that people realize that, oh, if I spend this money here, they're going to get to spend that money there. It's like they may then all of a sudden try to make coalitions, try to make deals, if they realize they actually will have a longer running game than just the one-offs. Other point arrangements quite obviously favor other behaviors. Absolutely. How you doing, Frank? Hope you're having a good day. Okay. HOA is the philosophy of evil. Well, you're putting people into groups, Unreal Brian, and that's how it goes. Aloha. Mahalo. Yeah. The people in groups. It's a mob rule in some sense. A brief introduction to quantum mechanics. Oh dear, I knew this was going to be trouble. Quantum mechanics is the physical theory that describes reality on a subatomic scale. Formulated during the first half of the 20th century, it is imbued with a series of concepts and paradoxes that make it profoundly counterintuitive compared to our everyday experience. The fundamental idea of the theory, which develops around the concept of granularity, has its roots in the work of Max Planck. In 1900, Planck realized that energy is not distributed continuously, but in discrete packets, quanta. Where's Ivan? I know we need to have him read this. Yes, absolutely. Started with the wrong definition. Yeah, see, these are the things I get worried about, QQ. I don't know enough about this, and this may be a very problematic way to set up the discussion, and I don't know. But this was reviewed. A lot of times, the first paragraph is just, throwing some ideas out there, and it doesn't really matter to the rest of the paper. We'll see. QBists don't say quantum mechanics is a physical theory. Okay, well, this is the introduction to quantum mechanics. This is not the introduction to QBism. They may yet get there later on saying, well, QBists disagree with this basic, naive understanding. QQ says even Bohr said that quantum mechanics is a theory about measurements or something like that. Yeah. Stockton says landlords are useless. Even Adam Smith and Marx agree that landlords and homeowners association are useless to the economy. Yeah. The problem is why people do this. I'm not even sure why people set things up like this, but yeah, it's not great. Okay. But anyway, it's a different problem. How do we actually set up society so it doesn't suck for people? I'd love to know. Okay. Einstein later extended this concept to explain the photoelectric effect alongside the hypothesis that light itself is composed of these quanta photons. However, the real revolution brought about by quantum mechanics lies not only in the quantization of energy, but in the way it redefines fundamental concepts such as position, causality, and the nature of particles, thereby reshaping our broader understanding of natural reality. And there's a one. So yeah, alright, this looks like... Yeah, it's like they're just referencing all the, books on quantum mechanics down here. I know you probably won't be able to read this, but yeah. Fuck landlords, yeah. A famous example of the counterintuitive nature of quantum mechanics is the effect of quantum superposition. A particle can exist in multiple states simultaneously. This is exemplified in the well-known double-slit experiment, or in more popular version, Schrödinger's cat paradox. When a photon is directed at a plate with two slits without being observed, it behaves like a wave passing through both slits simultaneously and creating an interference pattern. However, if one observes which slit the photon passes through, the interference pattern disappears and the photon behaves like a particle passing through only one of the two slits. In this sense, the act of observation appears to influence the physical state of the particle, introducing an element of uncertainty. It is impossible to know both the particle's precise position and its velocity simultaneously, a principle formalized by Heisenberg as the uncertainty principle. Success. Like, if capitalists and communists agree that landlords suck, why should we keep persisting on this dumb system? Yeah, well, inertia, because people don't want to give up what little they have, and they fight to the death to hold on to that shit. Also, we have no good way of transitioning without a lot of people dying in mass between one system and another. I don't think we do. Like, a lot of people die, which makes it hard to go. Energy says, to Energy's understanding, the majority of interpretations of quantum physics don't say that Schrodinger's cat is both dead and alive. That's a misconception. That's correct. But they didn't say that here. They just said the Schrodinger cat paradox. So they didn't say anything wrong. They just referenced Schrodinger's cat. They didn't say it was dead or alive. Yeah. I mean, it doesn't really matter, to tell you the truth. Because, again, they didn't say anything here. It's just the Schrodinger cat paradox. They didn't say anything about it. Okay. I mean, I don't know the exact... Again, I'm not a physicist, and so I'm reading this very far removed from my philosophy of physics. I do know some, but I don't know current stuff. Okay. How is it possible for a particle to be in two places at once, or for mere active observation to alter its behavior? The answer to these questions depend on how one interprets quantum phenomena. The most traditional interpretation, the Copenhagen interpretation developed by Bohr and Heisenberg, suggests that the so-called collapse of the wave function occurs when a measurement is made, with this collapse selecting one of the possible states and giving the particle a definite reality. In other words, quantum reality is indeterminate until it is observed. The main difficulty with this interpretation lies in its implication of an active role for the observer, assigning ontological significance to the act of measurement. If our intervention determines physical reality, how can we justify the existence of the world in the absence of observers? Other interpretations attempt to resolve these paradoxes without resorting to a collapse of the wave function. The many worlds interpretation, for instance, posits that all possible possibilities described by the wave function are realized in separate parallel universes, with each possible outcome of the measurement occurring in one of these worlds, thus eliminating the need for a collapse. In this view, quantum mechanics does not require an observer to determine reality. However, it does imply a multiplicity of worlds, which amounts to assuming the existence of something unobservable. Conversely, according to the hidden variables interpretation, an electron has a single position and there is no superposition of states. This hypothesis, supported by Einstein, who believed nature to be strictly deterministic, was strongly criticized by John Bell, as Bell's inequality. Did Einstein believe nature to be strictly deterministic? I mean, I guess I don't know really what Einstein's feeling was. QQ says, one of the axioms of quantum mechanics, superposition, states that any linear combination of states is also a possible state in which the system can be, but we cannot observe it since an observation after which the system collapses is impossible. Okay. A viable alternative to these positions is provided by the relational interpretation. According to Carlo Rovelli, the state of a particle is not determined by the system itself, but by the relationship between the system and its observer. In other words, there is no possible or conceivable state without a relationship. The wave function does not describe a standalone situation, but rather how a physical object might manifest to another physical object, us. Physics already has an inherent relational character, which becomes particularly evident in quantum mechanics. Every element can only be defined as such in relation to another element. It is the concept of relation that grounds that of a thing, not the other way around. A thing does not have properties inherently ascribed to itself, but possesses certain properties only in an interaction with one or more objects. If those properties do not manifest to something or someone, it is as if they do not exist. Frank says, I feel like the problem lies in using the word exists without explaining that it has a whole new complex meaning. Maybe, Frank, we'll find out what this stuff is. I'm willing to give this author some leeway at this point, and also the physicists some leeway, because the physicists are generally doing experiments. Something has to be out there that they're experimenting with. That's what exists, I guess you could say. That's what physics deals with. So nothing, this is all kind of hand-waving at the history right now, and that, like, the interpretation of various theories. But, like, yeah. Okay, so yeah, Lumpy has to deal with HOAs. Yeah, absolutely. And Luminance is laughing with the little Heidegger heads at the problem of being. Not surprising. So yeah, I'm just I'm giving this author in this paper a little bit of leeway here. This is not, they're not doing, as Luminance laughs, metaphysical, like just straight philosophical metaphysics. They're talking about what the physicists say and the different interpretations they use, and maybe those interpretations could use a better understanding of existence, but we're just describing them right now, I think. The relational perspective of Rovelli undoubtedly invites objections. For instance, it is unclear how the concept of relation can ground that of a thing, given that, conceptually, a relation already presupposes the idea of two distinct objects. However, the strength of the relational interpretation lies in its ability to render quantum paradoxes conceivable, not by adding assumed theoretical elements, but by altering the philosophical framework of reference, the way these phenomena are considered in relation to the concept of reality itself. By acting directly on the latter, the relational approach also indirectly influences how experiential results are understood. Even the QBist perspective, despite being based on a different viewpoint, adopts the same method. Okay, so here's where we're finally getting somewhere. The author is claiming that this QBist perspective takes on this relational aspect to it. So yeah. What is QBism? QBism shares with the relational perspective the idea that the wave function encodes information. However, unlike the relational view, which based on the concept of relation considers the observer as just another object in the world, QBism assigns centrality to the fact that the observer is us. In other words, whereas for Rovelli, physics has a relational nature without any special contribution from the subject, for QBism it has instead a status relative to our knowledge. The core idea is that physics is relative to our way of knowing. It describes what we know about the world. In this sense, QBism adopts an epistemic approach in which the wave function does not describe an objective, independent reality, but represents the state of belief of an observer about the world. QBism is Picasso, yes, K-Pars. Energy says, I believe relations being more fundamental than objects is a defensible philosophical perspective because we experience events, not objects directly. Yeah, but are events inherently relational than energy? I don't, like, it would depend on what you mean by an event. Now, if you think like, say, pencil or, shark pen. So I've got shark pen. This is an object. Of course, you're not experiencing it directly. You're experiencing it through the magic of Twitch and all the tubes in the internet. So it's like, yeah, of course, everything's mediated, but like, yeah, okay. So it's like, but exactly, is that relational or is that mediated? It's complicated at that point. Okay. You need a lemma? Hilarious. You need a lemma. I've not seen that before, actually. We can all describe all physics in categorical language. Yeah, we can. It's kind of true. Yeah, it is. It's just, you have to do it then. He's like, you have to start getting definitions. So it's like, sure, but everything's mediated. And I mean, this is not anything new. This is just the problem of skepticism as it's gone back thousands of years in the West, where it's like, okay, we think we have direct access to reality, except we make mistakes, except we have bad eyes, except we, get things wrong all the time. And so it's like, well, we can't be having direct access to reality. So it's like, yeah, you need a lemma. Yeah. Okay. So this is epistemic thing. So it's a state of belief. Yeah. So this QBism, which I don't know a whole lot about, but represents a state of belief of an observer about the world. So we have a knowledge state, and that's somehow interacting with stuff. Yeah, so it means that we can describe objects only using it in relations to other objects. That's fine. Yeah. Event or a third thing says Unreal. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah. Okay, and Lumpy's dealing with HOA shit. It gets complicated. People are complicated. Once you get like into these like social dynamics, it gets all craziness. And QQ says, yeah, probability is Bayesian. Okay, yeah, that's where I thought you guys said we were going, because I don't know, but you guys said it ends up like turning into Bayesian epistemology somehow. Subjective Bayesian interpretation is true. Okay, so that's where we're going. Interesting. Okay, the name QBism itself reflects two key elements of this interpretation. On the one hand, the qubit is the fundamental unit of quantum information used in quantum computing. While a classical bit can take the value of 0 or 1, a qubit is characterized by its ability to exist in a superposition of both 0 and 1. On the other hand, QBism is a shorthand for quantum Bayesianism, as it builds on the Bayesian interpretation of probability, which holds that probabilities are not objective probabilities of reality, but rather reflect an agent's knowledge and degree of belief. I don't mind my moles if I have only one more left. I don't mind. Go right ahead, right where we want. In line with this perspective, quantum probabilities are not intrinsic probabilities of physical systems, but express degrees of confidence, or subjective belief, that an observer has regarding the possible outcomes of an experiment. It should be noted that this epistemic conception is not new in physics, but is already present, for example, in statistical mechanics. Probability is always relative to the information available to the agent. Thus, probability does not exist as an external object, but rather takes shape as an evaluation made by a subject. This is what is called subjective probability. In this sense, the qubist interpretation applies the same perspective to the wave function as the subjectivist Bayesian probabilist applies to probability. The radical break of QBism with the usual way of thinking about science does not therefore lie in the interpretation of mathematical apparatus as a calculation of probabilities, but in the subjective interpretation of these probabilities. And yeah, that's fair as far as I understand the stuff. Most people, or a lot of interpretations, say this is just how the world is. It's probabilistic, and that's an external thing. If you start saying no, that's talking about our subjective epistemic state, that's a significant change in sort of the psychologization of physics. Like you're saying, it's what we know, or it's what our psychology is engaged with, which is very different. Lumen says this paper is trying hardest to bring together all the sacred objects into summon Ivan. Yeah, maybe. Almost like, yeah, paging Ivan Neo. Yeah. Okay. Hence, what does QBism precisely think about state superposition? Since this is phi, I guess. Phi or psi. That psi is not real. Superposition does not occur physically. Likewise, collapse is not real either, as no physical change takes place. Psi merely represents what we know about the system. So that's the wave function symbol. The wave function merely represents what we know about the system. There is only a change in the probabilities assigned by the agent. QQ says, also it says that reality does not exist. Actually, it's local interpretation, since experience is local, because it needs to violate Bell inequalities as standard quantum mechanics. It says there are no definite physical entities before measurement. Not only that we don't know what they are, that they do not exist. They don't exist before the act of measurement. I mean, that seems weird that we're just denying the existence of any sort of physical world before the act of measurement. I guess that's like any interaction with the world we have, that like it, pushes back, we have some interaction, but like the denial that their external world exists seems very strong. But like, yeah. K-Par says, I don't know if it necessarily entails a subjective probability, strength of belief versus evidence, sure, but only if you say belief. I guess maybe belief in the evidence. Yeah, that's a good question. I don't know what exactly the beliefs in question here are precisely. And QQ says the agent needs to be classical. Okay. Well, we're getting somewhere. I don't know what exactly where, though. The core idea is that it makes no sense to ask what happens inside Schrodinger's box when we cannot observe it. QBism refrains from providing an image of the world where observation is impossible. The question of whether the cat is alive or dead, or both, when unobserved is ill-posed because it implicitly assumes, on the one hand, the possibility of a third-person perspective on the world, one that could possibly simultaneously observe both the agent interaction with the cat or photon and the state superposition and subsequent collapse, and, on the other hand, the existence of an external world independent of experience. However, this independence cannot be demonstrated, since assuming an external perspective beyond one's own is logically impossible, whether as a species or as individual agents. Okay, so we're actually in a kind of idealism. It's like if, the Schrodinger puts his cat out into the forest, does it meow? It's like, can you hear it? Can you describe if it's alive or dead? It's like, well, if no one's there to observe it, then the tree didn't fall. The cat, you can't answer anything about the cat being alive or dead, which is, again, the whole point of the paradox is the weirdness of not being able to say the cat's alive or dead. Rudiger Schock papers on QBism says that reality is participatory, created by the agents. Yeah, so that's the whole thing. If the tree falls in the forest, does it make a sound? This is saying if it says no, because it says it's unanswerable. That's the answer of the cubist here. It's that if the tree falls in the forest and there's no one there to observe it, you can't even say the tree fell. So this is a very sort of subjective idealist position on the world, and that's okay. I'm just saying this is where we are at in the philosophy here. Kate Parr says agents aren't separate from the world, they are part of it. Yeah. But I mean, if this is saying that there has to be somewhere to some agent to observe it here, that's a very strong statement about like how the world exists. Again, like it's the old, if a tree fell in the forest and no one was there to observe it, did it make a sound? And this is giving a hard answer to that question, saying it is unknowable, or like it's a ill-formed question. Like that's strong. Okay. As will be discussed later, in QBism, reality is not so much objective as it is intersubjective. At the heart of the QBist perspective lies the awareness that all that is meaningfully expressible coincides with what is observable, and that questioning what lies beyond the observable is futile. Resistance is futile. At most, we can compare the information available to different subjects as well as our own information against empirical evidence. Oh dear, Lumpies. Yeah, you see, this is why Lumpy doesn't need philosophy. He's got his entire universe in his HOA. He's got game theory and ethics and life and death and like good and evil all there wrapped around. So that's what it is. And yeah, and you have like the whole politics wrapped up in it too. And bar all speculative real estate investment. Absolutely. World is not defined before the act of measurement. Yep. Frank says the reason it seems weird to say that it doesn't make sense to ask about the tree is because no one is around to hear it is actually an extraordinary hypothesis, because it was very close to implying that no one will ever observe the tree ever again. Yeah, I mean, it's strong. Like, and yeah, it's like, okay, the idea is like you can't even say that the part of the universe that we can't really look at, like you can't even say that that's a well-formed question. That to even say the part of the universe we can't see, because there's a lot in physics we can't see. But like the idea that it just somehow has no status at the moment, like what kind of no status is that? Yeah, exactly, Frank. If the tree falls outside our light cone, did anything happen? Can we even say that? So that isn't that weird? But like, yeah. Yep. Lumpy says, a tenant burst into tears in front of me and it confirmed that many owners are needlessly harsh on their tenants. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's rough. Like, and you're in, guess you can say, a metropolitan area of the world, and things are very expensive in like the whole place at the moment. So it's like, yeah, it's hard out there. Everyone's trying to get their dollar. It's like, why? Like, I'm trying to get my dollars too, but like, rent is very tough. QQ says falling of tree is information. After its sound wave dissipated environment, we can restore event, but influence will still be. Yeah, but see, of course it's information, but again, the calling it information is not innocent, because that does assume that the tree fell. It does, like something happened. The idea that there was even some information change and that you can quantize or quantify is something's going on right there. My building will not be one where we mistreat interest. Roar! You tell him, Lumpy. You tell him. Yeah. In other words, the role of the observation in QBism is not limited to recording a given reality, but extends to influencing the very definition of what is real. And that's what we've been discussing in chat. So it's like we're at least on top of what's going on here. This approach, however, does not imply a form of solipsism or the absolute privateness of the observer's viewpoint. The relativity of the latter does not entail the idea that each observer has secret or exclusive access to reality. On the contrary, QBism emphasizes that while every observer has a personal perspective, there is an intersubjective agreement that enables human beings to share their experiences and construct a common understanding of the world. What the fuck is an intersubjective agreement? I don't remember agreeing with anyone else about anything. So what the fuck is that? Like, I don't know what that is. It's very bright. I don't know if that's a good background highlighter color. You can explain. Well, we'll get there. I'm sure they're gonna have to explain too. Yeah, the sole existence relies on capitalism. Well, it's all capitalism, all the way down stock now, obviously. So we got problems. This intersubjective agreement, however, does not eliminate the dependence of reality on the agent who observes it. The very idea of a world as it is without agents is considered meaningless. Even the awareness of the existence of other viewpoints falls within the horizon of human knowledge and is relative to it. Yeah, so I guess if there are other people, then we have to consider the information state that they have, that they've experienced. And so it's a what's it called? You got like sort of a relational link where you have to say, well, this person saw that and that person saw that, and that like expands out. So I get the idea, but again, that's heavy reliance on some sort of concept of information processing that is not really explained, or it would be hard to explain. This interplay between subjective perspective and intersubjective agreement raises a fundamental question about the nature of reality in QBism. Rather than advocating an absolute or detached realism, QBism aligns with a form of empirical realism, one that is grounded in the subject's experience while acknowledging its inherent limitations. According to Moorhoff, this perspective has roots in Immanuel Kant's transcendental philosophy, which situates knowledge midway between empiricism and idealism. Okay, so here we're finally getting to the heart of the matter, Kant and QBism. Or not the heart. We've got another 9 pages. So this is like the first third. The introduction, we're like maybe through the introductory remarks, and we're finally getting to what the author really wants to say. So, and all you Kantians out there, you get to rejoice. Kant's epistemological perspective introduced the critique of pure reason, and if you are interested in the critique of pure reason, you should go follow our buddy Luminance Bloom. Oh, nope, I just shouted out Lumpy Dragon Potato again, but I didn't. That's what I mean. Too many lums in chat. So if you are interested in Kant or the critique of pure reason, our buddy Luminance Bloom has been reading through the critique of pure reason and doing other metaphysical stuff. He was just reading Aristotle last week, but I believe he's going back to Kant next week. So yeah, go give him a follow. He streams usually on Sundays at 4 p.m. Eastern or thereabouts. So yeah. Back to Kant this Sunday. So if you're interested in more Kant, then you go hang out over there. QQ says if there are different observers that measure some system, and what is measured depends on an observer, then we potentially have different outcomes, different positions of electrons after one measurement for different observers. This is a problem since we all agree that we measure the same position. Yeah, and this is the part of the issue. And that's intersubjectivity. Means that all different observers will observe the same outcome on one experiment. So it's weird there, but like I get what's going on. Like, yeah, someone measured it and then like you're assuming what their measurement was legit. Even if you were there, it would be slightly different. Sure. And that's intersubjective, like, okay, but it's getting a little wonky. So, but we'll see what happens in Kant. And I'm sure other people have looked into this. This is not something I'm thinking I'm being very clever about. So this intersubjectivity, I'm sure it's defined better in other places. But they want to obviously talk about something else. Okay. So so Kant's epistemological perspective introduced in the CPR is founded on the idea that knowledge is only possible through subjective structures that make reality experienceable. The dichotomy between phenomena and noumena is based on the intuition that space and time, as well as the categories of the intellect, are pure a priori forms, not elements of the external world, but subjective, universal, and necessary conditions that make experience possible. What's up, Adam? Hope you're having a good day. The transcendental subject, therefore, is the knowing agent, the universal viewpoint that filters and structures perceived reality. In this perspective, reality is not something objective in itself, but what is but is what is experienced through the limits and capabilities of the subject. Quote, what may be the case with objects in themselves and abstracted from all this receptivity and our sensibility remains entirely unknown to us. We are acquainted with nothing except our way of perceiving them. And that's a Kantian quote. Kapar says, I don't know if an agent matters. Particles have to exchange forces, whether the photon hits your eye or something else is exchanging forces and having effects. Sure, an agent has interactions with that for there to be knowledge of events, but there's tons of stuff that exists that I don't know about. At least that's your first reaction. Yeah, and see, the whole thing, that sounds like a straightforward point of view, but they're saying you can't even say that the photon existed without your knowledge state. So this is more subjective than what you're saying. This is very weird. Like, if the photon never hit your eye, you can't say that the photon existed. So it's like this is way more epistemically flavored than most theories. And that's why they're getting this Kantian backing, such that we can say, well, all of our thought is mediated, and that's what is doing the epistemic work here. What do we got here, Brian? You're going to go to bed. Thank you for stopping by, Lumpy. I'm happy to hear things are going well. I hope the mystery art project is successful, and the HOA is not evil. Let's see. What do we got from Brian? I'll take a look real fast. Okay. Well, I mean, there we go. A critique of pure reason. This is boring. I mean, it needs more JPEG, of course. This is ridiculous. Okay, there we go. QBism is very easy to explain due to entanglement we can describe by quantum superposition. Other agents also quantum systems for us. And is entangled with some system we measure, so we will all agree we see the same outcome. I mean, that's a lot of entanglement, my friend. Like, you're saying everything's entangled with everything. It's a lot of things getting tangled up. Viper says, we had better not tell this author what the 2022 Nobel Prize physics was for. What's up, Vipers? I hope you're having a good day. I mean, was QBism it? I don't know. I mean, how intersubjectivity explained in QBism? Okay, sure. So everything is going to be informationally tied up in other informations. If you want to use entanglement for that, sure, I don't care. But like, the point is, it's still tied into some sort of epistemic thing. It's mediated. And so the entanglement is not the fundamental thing, because entanglement would be physical, and the epistemic stuff, our knowledge state, is supposed to be fundamental here, and so the entanglement can't be fundamental. You prove Bell's theorem. Space is not locally real. Oh, okay, yeah. So, does QBism rely on Bell's theorem? I don't know if that's like I have no knowledge of this. So is like that a problem here? But like, that's cool. Kapar says, no, Adam says Kapar's. Oh, okay. Adam is asking Kapar something. I will let Kapar's answer for themselves. Okay, so the author quoted Kant and then says, this stance is a form of empirical realism. External objects exist, but they're being manifest only through our experience. Objective reality is not denied, but is always mediated by the structure of human knowledge. This implies that any discourse about reality, no matter how rigorous, remains intrinsically tied to the human perspective. In QBism, the laws of quantum mechanics do not describe an independent and objective reality, but represent the way a relational agent assigns subjective probabilities to the outcomes of future experiments. In this sense, QBism acknowledges that we can never escape the role of the subject in knowing the world. Reality emerges as a network of probabilities reflecting the observer's involvement. Yeah, and you can see right here, this reality emerges. And this statement of emerges is, that's a buzzword in philosophy. How does anything emerge out of anything else? But like, I get the point that we have this intersubjective network you can claim. But yeah. But exactly how things emerge, that turns a little hand wavy. Emergentism is a hand wavy, scary word. Okay, just as Kant highlighted the impossibility of accessing noumena, QBism denies the existence of an objective and independent reality that can be described outside the observer-observed relationship. It should be noted that this might give the impression that QBism turns the entire empirical world into something inaccessible, much like the Kantian noumena. However, this is not actually the case. Reality is not unknowable in itself as the noumenon is. Reality, what is known, is fully real, but its reality does not exist independently of experiences. It unfolds and is continuously redefined through intersubjective processes. In both cases, what we call reality is never an absolute given, but is mediated by interpretive frameworks. In Kant's case, pure forms and categories. In QBism, the probabilistic structure of experience. Okay. So this just feels like they're redefining the idealism to be like, this is just what it is. I don't know if I don't really like that as a strategy. It's saying, okay, there's no noumenon that we have no access to. It's just we have these experiences, and that is just this sort of idealistic, probabilistic thing that we get. Like, yeah. Everything's emerging these days. Exactly, Luminance. As basically Hegel's response to Kant. Yeah, I mean, this is like the same old shit again. So it's like, yeah. Okay, and y'all are discussing the Nobel Prize. Okay, that's over my head. So I get you can do this move, and it's not the worst move in the world. Like, it's okay. But you're going to lose a lot of people. And that's basically what's happening here. You're saying it's epistemic. You have no access to like the very real, but what you do have is this probabilistic observation strategies that you get with a quantum, whatever the Bayesian sense was, and the quantum stuff was. You've got this mishmash of quantum theory and Bayesianism. I'm not sure that's going to hold up in the final analysis, but again, not exactly my area. My worry again is that just assigning the world probabilities doesn't mean, and I was saying this earlier in stream about just mathematical abilities. You have to have the math tied to something in the world. You can't just have abstract math, because the math can be reapplied in any number of places. So if you have a probability, like say a probability that this is like going to happen 62.5% of the time, okay, but there's lots of stuff that's going to happen 62.5% of the time. You can't fix that 62.5% of the time to one thing and one thing only. You need something else. Okay, y'all are still discussing amongst yourselves. Okay. Even in the concept of objectivity takes on a new meaning. Whereas for Kant, objectivity derives from the universality of human cognitive structures. In QBism, objectivity again emerges from the intersubjective sharing of probabilistic rules. When was the last time you shared a probabilistic rule with somebody else? I mean, I'm just asking this, like, point blank. Is this actually what you do? Do you actually share probabilistic rules? I don't think I've ever shared a probabilistic rule with anyone. So the idea that this is just what they say we do, yeah, maybe they have a way of interpreting the way we speak as sharing probabilistic rules, but no one ever actually thought this is what we're doing. So maybe. It's not conscious, says QQ. Again, so that's metaphysical then, basically. So this is what we're really doing underneath everything else. So it's like, again, but that's why it's so uncomfortable. It's like, well, you have to postulate that this is what's happening, even though no one's ever consciously done this, or even like, and do you have some reduction of what we're saying to probabilistic rules? Because that would also be very hard. Like, show me what the probabilistic rule is of my last little monologue. What probabilistic rule is that I just shared? Tell me. I was talking to a philosopher of language here in New York City, and they were using some concept called, what was it? Unspeakability. So certain things are unspeakable. And it was like kind of like this. And they said unspeakability. I was like, what, like a tongue twister? And she got fucking, I think she was a little bit angry with me. I was like, what are you talking about? I'm like, this is a I don't like these theories. I'm not just going to come out and say, I don't like it when it's like, oh, you're doing it, but like you can't say it. Well, what the fuck? It's like, this is the unconscious psychoanalysis stuff. Is just math actually quantum entanglement? So my speech is reducing to quantum entanglement? How? I don't understand that. Like, maybe, but that's very far removed from my reality. It's like, no, before, couldn't you say that about Vidi, at least in the Tractatus? Yeah. So what Wittgenstein was saying was unspeakable in the Tractatus. Yeah, so that's fair that there's always things beyond what we're saying. But actually, so in the Tractatus, there's things we can talk about. And he's not reducing what we talk about to something else. What we talk about is a picture theory of language. So you have a picture theory of language, and basically you say something here, and then like reality is over here, and does it match up or not? That is unproblematic in terms of talking. Now, if you're saying, now what I say is something other than a match-up with reality, it's not a correspondence, and it's unspeakable what's going on, that's the problem. So certain language in Wittgenstein, you shouldn't be saying it because you can't actually match it up with reality. So that's not what's going on here. What's going on here is saying, okay, what we're describing is some sort of quantum rules, but we can't say what they are. No, that's not what's happening in Wittgenstein. In Wittgenstein, you're saying you're matching up with reality. And that match is like either it works or it doesn't. Like you're supposed to say, okay, I'm holding up 5 fingers at the moment. And if I say I'm holding up 5 fingers at the moment, it's just wrong. Like you can see it doesn't match up with the other hand. That's what's going on in Tractarian philosophy. Here it feels like, okay, there's some sort of quantum entanglement and we're sharing rules if I'm getting this right, but I can't say what they are, and that's different. Yeah, if anything, this actually seems like shut up and don't calculate. Well said, Vipers. There are different approaches to QBism. Okay. Loomis says, why? But doesn't he say like you can describe the picture, but not the frame, or am I misremembering? That's exactly right. You can say the picture. So I can say, here's a hand, and here's a hand, and I can match it up. Now, if I said, okay, look at my little box here that I'm sitting in, could I match that up to anything? No. I would have to get outside my reality to match up my box to everything else. Don't clip that. But like, yeah, that's what's going on here. So it's like, yeah, so that's actually a great, this is really funny that I can do this. This is my, like my Twitch. I can't match up anything, this whole thing to anything else. I exist in my little Twitch square here. But inside my world, I can say, okay, 5 fingers here, 5 fingers here, and they match up. And it's like, yeah, exactly, hair clips, Rod Durpin. So, but like, could I match up my entire reality to anything? It's like, no, there's nothing I could do from inside this picture to match up to show that the picture actually matches up to anything. So this is why there's no frame on the reality box. Okay? Yeah, the logical picture in the state of affairs. It's really funny that I got to actually demonstrate this. Like, the fact that like this was actually demonstrable in this second is a little mind-blowing in terms of Wittgensteinian philosophy. I never like... Because you never, like, even in, like, class, you're in the room with the person. Or if, like, you're listening to a lecture, you're listening to them. But like, at this point, I actually have a fucking frame around me. So it's like, yeah. Isn't it funny how everything in Agent Subjective Reality always matches up? Exactly, Vipers. Like, you're the hero of your own story. Okay, let's see. What are we doing? I got a reality in this box. Exactly. Show me your reality box. But see, that's why this is different. Like, inside the world, you can do all this logic stuff for the Tractatus. That's not a problem. But that's the question, what's going on in this theory here, because that's not what is being said. It's saying, look, in the Kantian world, I guess, or this Cubist sort of world, what's going on is that, what is going on here? You've got these sort of... probabilistic descriptions of things, and that's just what's going on, but you don't have access to like anything more than that. So it's got this very idealistic flavor where it's like, okay, we've got this probabilities and we're doing Bayesian reasoning on it, and it's getting more and more accurate, but there's no accuracy to anything. It's just you're getting more accurate in some sense. QQ says all math of quantum mechanics says that entanglement is possible, since all math of it, linear algebra and Hilbert spaces, and by tensor products we can create entangled states. What QBism says only that these states are personal degrees of belief, but which incorporate math in quantum mechanics. Yeah, and like that's cool. It's just it's separate from my reality. Like it's separate from my experience. Lumen says, oh, you didn't mean the theories are the same, just that you said you don't like theories that have an element that is unexplainable. Yeah, I'm not Tractarian anymore either. Well, that's fair. I don't like I don't like theories that have an element that's unexplainable. I'm not Tractarian. There's lots of stuff that's unexplainable. What I don't like, and I'll be more precise about, I don't like theories that have elements that are necessarily unexplainable. What kind of theory are we doing or using if part of it that we need to use, some sort of sufficient condition we need, is necessarily unexplainable? That's really what I don't like. When it becomes needed, but I can't talk about it. That's really the problem here. But like, yeah, thank you for calling me out on that. Like, my qualification's rather important in this case. Adam says, I'm trapped in and I can't get out of this box. Let me out of this coffin. There is no box. All Xenia. Okay. You have to just tell your favorite joke again. Are we talking about solipsism again, or is it just be bada bing, bada boom? Yeah. And it's still good, Vipers. It's still good. Okay. I don't know who that question is, separate from my reality, is not intuitive for you. Yeah, I mean, if you're asking is QBism the idea that we're describing quantum states in our everyday reality, that is not intuitive for me, because I'm just sitting here, man. I don't know what that means in terms of quantum probabilities. Frank says, none of us outside your box can even tell if I'm alive or dead. You know, I've actually met Tindarios, so I was alive at that point, at least according to Tindarios, and I've met Luminance, so I was alive at that point, but they don't know if I'm still alive. I mean, you've just got this broadcast. Yeah, I mean, sure. I might not exist. Okay. Where was I? Okay, yeah, so for Kant, objectivity is guaranteed by the fact that all human subjects structure their experience through the same a priori forms of intuition and categories of understanding, which universally determine the way empirical objects appear to us. In contrast, QBism rejects the idea that objectivity stems from a fixed universal structure imposed on experience, considering objectivity as emerging dynamically from the shared use of quantum probabilistic rules. And this is what I had a problem with. I don't understand this, really. The tides are looking at it, yeah. Does the moon exist when no agent is looking at it? No, and according to this, Vipers, probably not. Although, yeah, I've never seen China. Is that place even real? It's like, you've never seen Wyoming. Viper says, Wyoming is merely a useful tool for you to organize your future potential personal sensations. Exactly. The laws of quantum physics do not describe an independent world, but provide a universal framework within which agents can coordinate their expectations about how the world behaves. Excuse me. From this difference, however, it might seem that QBism implies a purely instrumentalist or subjectivist stance, as if, unlike Kant, it simply collapsed all principles into the category of regulative principles, serving only as heuristic guides in scientific inquiry. This is not the case, as QBism acknowledges structural constraints that shape an agent's experience of reality. Okay. So it acknowledges something else, too. I don't know what this other stuff is, this structural constraint. The sun disappears when you go to sleep, yeah. So, no, I get the idea that, okay, you use these concepts to structure your reality, like stuff you've never observed, you can still use it. But that's not what was being said here. It's that the only things that exist are the observable ones, and then it's intersubjective somehow. But then I'm observing, like, again, someone who has observed Wyoming, even though I never have. But I mean, in my current setup, I'm using that as a mere abstract rule, because who knows, like, how many steps removed I am from Wyoming right here. Yeah, structural constraints of Bourne rule. Okay, you just came back and you're hearing academic jokes. Are you surprised, Sock now? When I'm asleep, who wets your bed? Hey, if you don't experience it, you didn't wet the bed. Okay. You get probabilities by taking square of the state. Yeah, it's fine. And so I'm not worried about how you do it. I'm just worried about what that actually is. Like that you're taking probabilities of a state. Not that you can square the state and it's okay. That's fine. Okay, according to its main proponents, QBism does not deny the existence of an external reality. Rather, it posits a form of participatory realism in which reality is co-constructed through the interaction between the agent and the world. In this case, while the principles of quantum mechanics function as constraints guiding an agent's expectations, the actual experience of an event such as observing a live or dead cat reflects a concrete reality for the agent. As Fuchs clarifies, quote, "For the cubist, the real world, the one both agents are embedded in, with its objects and events, is taken for granted. What is not taken for granted is each agent's access to the parts of it he has not touched." Yeah, and so this is why I feel like this is Kantian idealism right here. Because it's like, all right, we're going to postulate the noumena. That's exactly what we're doing right here. This is the noumena. The objects and events are taken for granted. What is not taken for granted is the access you have, which is the Kant's phenomena, and this is why it's a Kantian style theory. And then you have to explain this. Q says we get probably. Oh yeah, Luminance says, "I don't know you exist, but having met you raises my subjective probability that you do." Exactly there, and that's kind of what's going on. And putting it that way, which is a really nice, succinct way of saying it. Suck what? But thank you, men in tights. But like that's weird, isn't it? Because it's like it's not. I met you, and I'm like, well, I don't know if you're alive, but it raises my understanding of like the probability that I think you do. It's like that's the weirdness here. If there's a delayed post to that comment, I wonder if it got held up. Yeah. Objects and events are experienced, not noumena. No, exactly, QQ. I know that, but like that's what I was saying. It's taken for granted. Maybe I got a little delayed or something. But like that was the point. Was that the noumena is not experienced. It's taken for granted right there. Baraday, what's up? What's up? How you doing? Noumena is a source of experience. We get QBism says there's no world behind the quantum states. Yeah, that's fine. It takes it for granted that there is a world, I guess, but we can only know the states. Shout. That's not how I do stuff. On lunch as usual. Oh, well, thanks for stopping by on your lunch break. If anyone doesn't know our buddy Baraday is another philosopher here on Twitch, working on the concept of charisma, which he refuses to define apparently, or it's not important to define the concept of charisma, even though he's writing a whole PhD thesis on the topic. And Baraday's good fun. He's out in Australia and righteous cunt. So yes. And he's actually reading the book by C.T. Nguyen on the aesthetics of games. I forget the name off the top of my head, but C.T. Nguyen's always been a perennial favorite here on my channel and some of the other people on Twitch. So it's like, this is like good stuff. I've referenced C.T. on one of my papers recently that's under review right now, but I always like that stuff. So yeah, it's cool. Who needs definitions when you've got the Riz? Exactly, he's got it. It's defined quite well in the thesis, but that in itself is unimportant. Yeah, so you just, throwing it in for shits and giggles for assholes like me, just to make it happy. It doesn't really matter. It's unimportant. It's just, it's a little irrelevant detail that you're defining your subject. I see. That's how it goes. Anyway. But yeah, this is the issue. It's like, what do we know? Well, you don't know much, but you get some sort of probabilistic updating going on in this theory here. And it's an 82,000 word definition, Lamau. Yeah, that's great. Well, only 5,000 more words to go, right? So you're almost done. Okay. So therefore, QBism does not reduce all of reality to mere heuristic rules, but maintains a balance between subjective belief and empirical fact, ensuring that experience is neither an arbitrary construct nor a direct reflection of an independent world, but rather a structured interaction between observer and phenomenon. Yeah, so I get the idea. So we have an experience, we upgrade our probabilistic Bayesian reasoning based on the experience, and that is how it works at the quantum level too. So close you can smell it? Well, that's good. That's good. I mean, I never got a PhD, and all the best advice I did here, and is what everyone said, it's just ass in chair time. You need to get your ass in your writing chair and be writing. Always be writing. So that's the thing. That's how it goes. It's like, yeah. On the other hand, I write papers and publish them, apparently. Adam says, value of data has to be explained in what is a positive note and a negative note in other possible worlds. What is positive here could be negative there. Real metaphysical issues. I completely agree. I think that's exactly the difficulty here, is that probability tells us nothing on its own. Probability makes no distinctions on its own. The idea that we're getting just this sort of probabilistic updating, well, updating of what? Like, so Luminance made the joke, we hung out when I was coming through Buffalo a few months back, and that updated his probability of my existing. The idea that I have an existence that could be updated relies on the idea that I exist. That was presupposed by the ability to update the probability associated with it. The probability does not come before the object. The probability of the object comes attached to it as a property. It's secondary. So it's like, that's one of my main problems. Yeah. Great times. So yeah. QBism possible that classical agents exist. Yes. But see, that's why it's so weird to me. As you said, it's a postulate there. And that is part of the philosophical background that's interesting. You know? Why he exists is another problem. Yeah, and that's exactly QQ. That's part of the philosophical question here. Faraday asked, what's the shortest ever written philosophy dissertation? You know, in some departments they allow for 3 published papers, and not all papers are that long. So I wouldn't be surprised if 3 published papers, at least in the contemporary era, some of them might be shorter. Of course, Wittgenstein's Tractatus was accepted as for his PhD work. So they granted him a doctorate of philosophy at Cambridge for the Tractatus, and the Tractatus really ain't that long in terms of word count. So I mean, that is short, and but yeah. Yeah. Lumen says, obviously different field, but I saw a 1-page comp sci dissertation. I mean, yeah, if you prove some crazy fucking thing in like a math or science and he only takes a page to do it, yeah, I mean, that might qualify. Well, yeah. Fucking Wittgenstein, yeah. Well, the quote from Moore was, well, this is not of the usual quality, but we'll accept it anyway. I mean, British humor for you. It needs to have words, yeah. Well, I mean, again, if you can prove some like crazy math thing in 1 page of proof, and you can just be like, hey, look, I proved Fermat's last theorem in 1 page using math that Fermat could have used, as opposed to like the Andrew Wiles thing. Oh, I watched that Andrew Wiles thing you sent me, Vipers. It was cool. Like, that would get you I can guarantee you, if you prove Fermat's last theorem in a way that Fermat could have done it, and you do it on 1 page, like he just didn't have space in the margin, but he could have done it, like that will get you, I'm sure that'll give you a doctorate that day. But no one's doing that. That's too hard. QQ says, intuition why we can postulate why classical observer exists is because we experience ourselves, I think. No. We experience a probability, and we update our probability on ourselves. Unless you're going to just like pull some sort of Cartesian, well, I think, therefore I am, and that's guaranteed. And that's guaranteed by what? God? Well, you have some doubt in this world about that. And you may treat it as if it's like hard knowledge, but that's a mixed theory at that point. You're not doing one thing, you're doing multiple things. Lumen says one word, all caps. Being! Yeah. Reading Heidegger today so this was particularly funny. Okay, reading Heidegger, there we go. Okay, where were we? Let me try to get through this before I lose my mind, because we're only about a little over halfway, I think. We're about halfway. Okay, yeah. In this context, we aim to assign the epistemic view offered by critical philosophy a status that can be described as functional operational. The Kantian modus operandi proves conceptually useful when applied according to its general and central idea. By abandoning a static and literal interpretation of Kantian doctrine, it becomes possible to make it fruitful in other contexts. As Bitbull notes in his article, A Cure for Metaphysical Illusions, no serious use of the evolution of the doctrines can be made if they are considered from the outset as immutable claims of truth, end quote. Critical philosophy must be conceived as a conceptual tool rather than as, quote, a closed system of thought, end quote. This approach was developed by the Neo-Kantians, who recognized the possibility of modifying and replacing a priori forms with other structures. Oh, and luminance. I've made this comment to you before on stream, I believe, but I was just saying that Bayesianism just feels like Hegelianism to me. And so, in this context, that we're just updating a Kantian structure with a neo-Hegelian mathematical scheme. It's like, okay, that makes sense that this is kind of a direction to go. Okay. In this regard, it is essential to emphasize that any comparison between QBism and Kantian transcendental idealism should not be interpreted as an endorsement of a rigidly orthodox vision of Kantian thought. The Kantianism of QBism diverges significantly from Kant's rigid systematization of knowledge. For instance, whereas Kant postulates a well-defined architecture of cognitive faculties, distinguishing between the pure forms of sensibility, the categories of understanding, and the role of reason, this conceptual framework should not be assumed as an immutable ontological structure, but rather as a heuristic model designed to elucidate the constraints of human cognition. A contemporary perspective, including that of QBism, does not necessarily adopt Kant's specific distinctions as fixed, but retains the fundamental idea that all knowledge is mediated by conceptual filters. Now, yeah, you agree on this one. I knew that, but we're going to convince Ivan about that. The problem with convincing anybody about this is that Hegel. You understanding Hegel. How does anyone understand fucking Hegel? And that's the problem. We're not going to explain Hegel to someone who isn't a metaphysics nerd. So Hegel, it's just like that's running into walls at this point. And believe me, I didn't get Hegel until comparatively recently. It took me years to be like, oh, this is what Hegel's up to. QQ says no. Hegelianism says there are some absolute spirit. QBism says there's no bird's eye view or something like that. Yeah. So it's not the spirit of Hegel. It's the dialectics of Hegel that I'm claiming here. And that's a fair point, QQ. It's not the the world spirit. It's the dialectics of, the Bayesianism is a update kind of dialectical system. You've got, the thesis, antithesis, and sublation. That's just a very Bayesian sort of, you've got old ideas predicated on new evidence, and then you update. So the Bayesian update is a Hegelian process, and that's what me and Luminance were joking about a while back now. But it's a Hegelian update process, not the world spirit. So yeah, thank you for calling that out. Yeah. QBism is subjective. Okay, yeah, so I'm not an expert in Hegel, but this is my interpretation of it. It's just, and how I interpret Bayesianism as a Hegelian update process. Yeah. But yeah, Luminance knows way better about this stuff than I do. Okay. Thank you for the lurk. Good luck, be safe, don't get caught. Alright, continuing with the paper. Indeed, as contemporary reinterpretations of Kantian thought suggest, the true epistemological breakthrough of critical philosophy does not lie in the precise delineation of faculties or categories, but in the recognition that our access to reality is always mediated. Yeah, and so there's modern skepticism stuff. Whether these mediating structures are described as Kantian a priori forms, as symbols from Cassirer, or as mathematical conceptualizations from Cohen, the fundamental insight remains unchanged. Knowledge is always perspectival and bound to the cognitive structures of the knowing subject. QBism aligns with this vision by emphasizing the participatory role of the agent in the construction of reality, while simultaneously rejecting the idea of an underlying noumenal world that is fundamentally inaccessible. In contrast to Kant's strict separation between phenomena and noumenon, QBism reconfigures this distinction in terms of the limits of epistemic access rather than as a metaphysical dualism. In this sense, QBism indirectly reinterprets Kantian insights as a non-orthodox and flexible manner, treating the transcendental perspective as an adaptable framework rather than as a rigid metaphysical doctrine. Yeah, so you're updating this Kantian thing probabilistically. I gotcha. That's why, in the conceptual architecture of neo-Kantian thought, the interpretation of the Kantian transcendental is not configured as the imposition of rigidly structured categories, but rather as a critical methodology oriented towards exploring the foundational conditions of knowledge. For example, from this hermeneutic perspective, and this is the back and forth, the hermeneutic. Kant's commitment to a deterministic ordering of natural laws does not constitute an obstacle to identifying structural correspondence with the epistemological framework of QBism. Although Kant conceived empirical physics as necessarily subject to a priori principles among which determinism stands out, the neo-Kantian interpretation prioritizes the epistemological function of the noumenon as a limiting concept rather than as an assertion of metaphysical nature. From this interpretive standpoint, the apparent contradiction between Kantian determinism and the radical indeterminacy inherent in quantum mechanics does not undermine the shared fundamental critical stance. Both positions reject the possibility of meaningfully describing a reality entirely independent of the constitutive constraints of experience. The tension between these two approaches rather represents a fertile moment of transformation in the ongoing dialogue between transcendental inquiry and scientific research, where the limits of knowability do not mark the end of investigation, but instead continuously redefine its methodology and conceptual horizons. Alright, this is very nicely said. I don't think anything new got said here. It's just, you're just rehashing the same shit. But that's fine. Furthermore, the idea of the functionality of a priori forms in critical philosophy was advanced by Hilary Putnam. Each a priori should be considered relative to a specific mode of mental activity and corresponds to its presuppositions. How then can the fundamental intuition of critical philosophy be applied to modern science and particularly to physics? Quote, and who's this from? This is Ibid, so this is all, I guess, Hilary Putnam maybe? Yeah, I don't like this referencing. It says see Ibid. Well, which fucking Ibid is that then? What's 16? I don't know. I'm a little confused by it. I guess it's some Hilary Putnam quote, I assume. It is to construe each object of science as the focus of a synthesis of phenomena rather than as a thing in itself. Accordingly, it is to accept that the very possibility of such objects depends on the connecting structures provided in advance by the procedures used in our research activities. Something is objective if it results from a universal and necessary mode of connection of phenomena. In other words, something is objective if it holds true for any human active subject rather than reflecting intrinsic properties of autonomous entities. End quote. When considered in these terms, the perspective of critical philosophy can be applied to any object of science which ceases to be conceived as a pre-existing underlying absolute reality. As Bitbull observes, the conception of science founded on this assumption is fully viable today. The QBist interpretation then serves as a clear contemporary example of this way of conceiving physics. QBism and Kantianism in fact assess the relationship between subject and reality in similar ways, for both the concept of the agent on the one hand and the transcendental subject on the other constitute the condition of possibility for knowledge. The physical structure of the observer's world is relative to the observer themselves. Moreover, like Kantianism, QBism does not reject the idea of an objective reality, but grounds this objectivity in the notion of intersubjectivity. In Kantian terms, this intersubjectivity corresponds to the universality and generality that characterize the transcendental subject. The Kantian subject is defined as transcendental not only because it possesses perceptual and intellectual structures that mediate the world, but also because these very structures are shared universally across all members of the human species, repeating themselves in each determined subject. A lot of mouthful here. One sec. Yeah, so where are we going with this? I don't know. Although QBism does not refer to pure a priori forms or representational schemas, its epistemic approach can be fundamentally described as neo-Kantian. Where QBism asserts the conceptual emptiness of the question of whether the cat is alive or dead when unobserved, neo-Kantianism emphasizes the vacuity of asking how objects exist independently of a subject who perceives them through a priori forms. These two claims share a central element, the recognition that any description of reality depends on the agent's mode of knowing. The concept of experience becomes, in both QBism and Neo-Kantian perspectives, a process that grants reality to the concept of an object, that assigns it an ontological status in such a way that the epistemological and ontological levels converge. A thing, identified either with a particle in quantum mechanics or with an entity perceived through Kantian sensibility, becomes such only when it is experienced. What is not experienceable lacks a proper ontological status. The thing in itself lies outside human cognition and is therefore unknowable. Any attempt to make assertions about it goes beyond the limits of meaningful discourse, as our conceptual framework is bound by the conditions of experience. Similarly, QBism emphasizes that questioning what lies beyond can be experienced, beyond what can be known and observed, takes us outside the realm in which our concepts and representations have applicability. I mean, this is, in some sense, I get this. Don't talk about stuff that we have no causal relation to. This is not a crazy thought. The problem here, again, is very idealistic in that it says, look, you need the agent's subjectivity to be doing some sort of Bayesian updating, and that's what reality is. I don't like that. Like I was saying before, to update, you need to have a concept of what you're already updating. Energy says, the reason I'm sympathetic to ontological idealism and not just epistemic idealism is because if our understanding is mediated by the intuitions and concepts of our mind, how can we meaningfully say it's even possible that something mind-independent exists? Yeah, and that's a good question. And that's, I guess, part of, like, you get this probabilistic thing from the world, but you can't exactly say what it is. But that's hard. Like, I don't know what that is that you get from the world that gives us the ability to sort of reevaluate our position. QBism doesn't say that we can't speak out was unexperienced. It says it just doesn't exist. Yeah, well, that's... I mean, we can't speak about it, and then it says it doesn't exist. I mean, in some sense, it is a quietism. It says it doesn't exist. Well, what are you going to say about it? Well, it doesn't exist. It is a form of quietism that I'm going for here. And that's what I mean by when you say I can't speak about it. It says, like, there's nothing to be said about anything like this. It's that it's beyond the limits of what we can, participate with. As you say, reality is participatory. So it's like it is bringing on a quietism about anything beyond our ability to interact with it. So it's like, yeah. So, and that's what I meant by experienced. But like, yeah, I mean, I get that, but it seems very limiting. Yeah, Vipers, cooperative solipsism. And it's like, that is an intermediary spot, because you are sort of acknowledging that others exist in your solipsism, but at a very limited way. But then the question is, how would you do that? Also known as probably bullshit. Well, again, I don't want to shit on this theory. It's not for me, but a lot of this sort of, a lot of people fall in this range. They like this sort of stuff. So it's like, yeah, and that's how all of these sort of Neo-Kantian stuff go. And I don't have a problem with that. There's a lot of Neo-Kantians out there. So it's like, they like this stuff. That's cool. Maybe not for me, but like, it's not that problematic of a theory. QQ says, it's not says that we can't have information about some system. It says that the system doesn't exist before measurement. Yeah. And like, that's okay in some sense. I mean, it's weird that you're saying you're measuring something that doesn't exist until the moment of measurement, because what were you up to? But like, again, I guess you're allowed to have faith that the world exists and that you're measuring something. Like, yeah, but like, this is sort of like the tension that's going on. Viper says, what I don't like about it is that every single question asked, it requires hand waving. Well, you are in a philosophy stream, Vipers, but yes. QQ says, we don't measure, we update probabilities which correspond to experience. Yeah, but that's the question. You are updating the probabilities by measuring. You're measuring something. I mean, what are you measuring then? Well, it didn't exist. Well, you're updating probabilities. Yeah, of what? What existed? Or what you thought existed in your head. But then what do you think exists in your head? Well, you have to assume the world still holds, I guess. And it's just sort of... Now, I get it. It's like, this is an idealistic theory. This is the sort of way these arguments work. Energy is sympathetic to the relational interpretation of quantum physics, which to their understanding is unlike QBism, says that while observation creates properties at the quantum level, observers aren't necessarily classical with quantum systems. Yeah, and I believe the author here mentioned that earlier and said it was similar stuff. So it's like, yeah, it's not that far off, I guess. Adam says, in theory exchange, past successful posits like phlogiston and ether were abandoned. A Morean assertion of current theoretical entities faces historical defeaters, undermining their presumed security. True. Energy is also sympathetic to panpsychism. Yeah, I mean, how you get this sort of interactive thing and like the importance of subjective observers is going to need some sort of theory of mind, and that will play into this too, I guess, which is where the panpsychism comes, because what actually counts as observation. So it's like, it's fair, but it's like all these theories are nearby each other. Okay, try to get through this. I got like another 6 pages or 5 pages to go, I think. Okay, however, it would also be incorrect to claim, for example, that data do not exist before being experienced. Okay, see, this is what I was saying. Well, what exists before being experienced? Well, data does not exist before being experienced. It's wrong to say data does not. Now, I'm like, how do you square this circle? Because the world does not exist before experiencing it, apparently, but data does. Okay. Author says, this is not the position adopted by Kant or by QBism. Such a claim, okay. So QBism doesn't say this. Yeah. Sorry. Such a claim would reflect an idealistic response which tends to equate reality with thought, positioning everything external to thought as devoid of effective existence. Instead, the critical and QBist positions simply emphasize the importance of acknowledging the impossibility of an external perspective separate from the human one. Oh, come on. It's like, we're not saying it doesn't exist. We're just saying you have to emphasize the other, what you're doing, the measurement. It's like, come on, really? That's a weak answer. Now, you can do that, but that's also the quietism. You just don't speak about it. It says the importance of acknowledging the impossibility of an external perspective. It's like, come on. Come on. It's like, okay, we don't say it doesn't exist. It's just, we're just saying only what you experience matters. It's weak. Like data before experience, like that makes no sense to me. And this is the difficulty. You still need an external world. No one wants to get rid of the world. But how do you describe it if your theory does not allow you to postulate something that is separate from your experience? Well, there's some world out there, but we only talk about what we can experience. So what we're going to do is focus on our experience. That's it. Yeah. And the external perspective can't exist because of a violation of the Bell inequality. Yeah, so what you can do is you can do a local theory. And that's what they're doing. They're saying what you can experience yourself is there. There's no global world. Unreal says, solipsism is not for everybody. QQ says, so it denies realism, existing physical entities before measurement. Yep. So it's very local. So it's like super local, actually. Basically, you have to be experiencing it, and when you're experiencing it, then it's real, and at no other point, I guess. Okay. About such unexperienced data, it is impossible to affirm anything, neither its existence nor its non-existence. And this is what I meant when I said quietism before. You can't say anything, neither is it its existence nor its non-existence. At most, it can be observed that, subjectively for the human species, a certain datum cannot be defined in ontological terms until it is apprehended. Yet this statement is far removed from asserting that an unexperienced object has no reality in the external world. In this latter case, the idea of a world independent of human cognition remains, alongside the idealist view that the thought is the origin of reality. QQ says it's local because the collapse of wave function is updating properties which exist in some human mind, which is local. Yep. So yeah, that's what it is. The phenomena is updating with the human mind somehow. Okay. Neither Kant nor QBism, however, questions the existence of a foundation of reality common to all experience. There's nothing that can be affirmed about this world independently of the mediation of the human modus cognoscendi. While recognizing the existence of an external world independent of the observer, one must, in other words, quote, insist that the ontology of this world is such that it puts constraints on the information gathering capacities of the observer on epistemology. Viper says it's basically a video game that doesn't render reality until a player looks at, which makes the rules for creating a game world and the game world itself indistinguishable. Okay, I go along with that, but is that everyone is Neo? Nah. See, yeah, I've heard these theories before. I forgot. I think it was Zizek actually who said that there were theories like this, and I think that might be right. Like that is kind of what's going on here, Vipers. So yeah. Is that reality doesn't exactly, it's sort of like, as you said, it renders when we see it. And everything else is just sort of, not even the Matrix, is just nothing. Sock says, I believe that data is more the forensic of experience, but it's not before experience. That is a time word inserted in the wrong place, like data is a decay of current information. Yeah, but like, that is not what these people are saying. But like, yeah, your position is more standard, I think, at this point compared to QBism. But like, yeah, they have a different theory. Yeah. Oh, it's a Wheeler idea. Okay. I heard Zizek bring that up first, but Wheeler may have said that. Like, everything else exists as rules. Yeah. And that's basically it. Because they were saying you're Bayesian updating, and that's quantum rules. Or probabilistic rules you're updating. So that would make sense. Like what you're saying, Vipers. This is not like, as far as like a sciencey style metaphysics, like it's not as crazy as it might be. Like the idea that you can formulate it in the way you did, that like makes at least some sense, means it's not as out there as like, a lot of like insane theories that don't really make sense. This one, at least you can kind of put it together and be like, well, I don't like it, or I do like it. It's not like the weirdest shit out there. Okay, moreover, the Kantian thing in itself, which is unknowable, can, in a certain sense, be found in a different form in the QBist perspective. For Kant, the notion of a thing in itself indicates the idea of a reality independent of human knowledge. In a neo-Kantian interpretation of the transcendental discourse, ontology and epistemology coincide. In this sense, what lies beyond our epistemic capacities cannot be known, nor can anything meaningful be said about it. The thing in itself serves as a limiting concept that marks the boundaries of human knowledge, indicating what cannot be an object of experience. Precisely, because it exceeds our epistemic capacities, it lacks a proper ontological status. Reality is such only as far as it appears in a certain way as an experience. In the QBist perspective, the thing in itself can be likened to the unobservable. The inaccessible refers to the idea of a world beyond human experience, like the cat in the closed box, about which the knowing subject can make no determinations. Similarly, in recognizing the limits of our knowledge regarding the thing in itself, Neo-Kantianism highlights, as much like QBism, the pointlessness of assigning a reality status to what exceeds the phenomenal. QQ says, when you deep dive into quantum mechanics and foundations of quantum mechanics, always what was intuitive before becomes absurd. So I don't think that it is unlikely that it is unlikely good is a good argument here. That's fair. I mean, if you're gonna go with metaphysics, sure. But I mean, if you're directing that at me, that wasn't my main argument with it. That wasn't my main problem with it. If you think it's like, if you're arguing with Vipers saying that, okay, it's just the video game reality is unlikely, it's like, okay, yeah, maybe, but we need to, saying it's unlikely at that point says, well, we don't know, we'd have to investigate. And that's fair defense too. Viper says the initial game world requires a random seed to determine initial probability, so what defines that? God? I mean, in defense, in terms of physics, they do say that, like, whatever the physical constants are, say, like, whatever the gravitational constant is, the strong and weak force in the atoms, those are basically set by something in the universe for whatever reason, and that would just be set by God anyway, whatever that happens to be. So I guess the QBist here would allow there just be more settings to be set, but we already have that in some sense in terms of, like, the speed of light compared to the gravitational force and other things. So that's still we still have that. We're going to have that problem outside of this QBist theory regardless. So, yeah, that won't bring down QBism. A shared objection. In Helgoland, Carlo Rovelli puts forward an interesting objection that summarizes some criticisms directed at QBism. In this paragraph, I considered it appropriate to examine this objection and attempt to respond to it, as overcoming Rovelli's point of view allows for a clearer understanding of the position shared by the critical philosophy and QBist interpretation, as well as the connection between the two perspectives. According to Rovelli, the weakness of the QBist perspective lies in the anchoring the concept of reality to the subject's knowledge, in the fact that it bases ontology on epistemology, as already noted, rather than the other way around. This would lead to a form of idealism insofar as reality would entirely correspond to a subjective content of consciousness. Rovelli writes, commenting on the QBist position, quote, "QBism anchors reality to a subject of knowledge, an I that knows, which seems to stand outside nature. Instead of seeing the observer as part of the world, it sees the world reflected in the observer. It abandons naive materialism but ends up falling into extreme idealism. The crucial point is that the observer itself can be observed. We have no reason to doubt that every real observer is also described by quantum theory." End quote. The fact of anchoring reality to a knowing I becomes problematic. According to Rovelli, as far as it implies that the subject is seen as an element external to nature. While the relational perspective considers the knowing subject as just another object within the world, QBism views the knowing subject as a subject from which reality is defined. I'm starting to lose my mind at this point. What is an observer anyway? Yeah, I don't think they define it very clearly or fundamentally here. It's just part of their fundamental ontology that there are observers here. And I think that's part of actually the discussion that's going on right now. Okay. In a sense, for QBism, the agent has a privileged role, whereas physics should provide an account of objective reality in which the agent describing the world is not only an observer of other objects, but also an object itself. A single world that includes the observer and other objects, with its final description encompassing the observer as well. Rovelli argues this position by asserting that an observer can also be observed. In other words, even the observer describing reality can, in turn, be described by other subjects. Thus, the world is not relative to a single observer, as the latter can always become an object of observation to others. Reality exists even if I do not observe it. So QQ says observer is fundamental or emergent. Some kind of fundamental classical observer needs to speak about quantum mechanics. Just so you don't know, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, yeah. Well, it does seem like they are just taking it as primary, like something fundamental, and we don't know what it is. They're just assuming it, which is generally problematic. Viper says, but given that the concept of observer is fundamental to the entire theory, you should probably figure it out. Yes, I agree. It's hard, though. I mean, that's like... Yes, you are right, but also it's like asking the big question, like, what is consciousness? What are we doing here? And so, like, even though you are correct in calling them out on their bullshit for this one, no one has an answer to that, and everyone has a problem with it. Well, not everyone, but everyone has some big problem. So it's like they're not going to answer that, but they probably don't feel that bad about it either, which is the bigger problem. They're just like, they're going to bite that bullet. I feel like that's how they're going to respond. You've been to quantum mechanics, but I've never been to you. Yeah. Like, there's a joke there that I am not clever enough to make at the moment. Maybe you come to you. Yeah, it'll come to you. Something comes to you. Something. Okay, quote. If I observe an observer, I can see things that the observer does not see. By reasonable analogy, I conclude that there are things that I, as an observer, do not see. Therefore, there are more things I can observe. The world exists even if I do not observe it. I want a physical theory that accounts for the structures of the universe, clarifies what an observer is within a universe, and not a theory that makes the universe depend on me as an observer. Oh, interesting. I did not know that, Vipers. It's a song. Interesting song. All right, that was end quote. I guess that's more Rovelli saying, look, like, I want a theory of the universe, not something that makes the whole universe depend on me. This point of view is ultimately based on the intuitive belief that one can reasonably claim, for example, the city of Milan exists even when I am not physically in Milan. The QBist perspective, however, by a certain, we were already talking about Wisconsin earlier, like Wisconsin, Milan, never been to either, so how would I know it exists? The QBist perspective, however, by asserting that the concept of reality is based on the limited knowledge of the subject has of it, aims to express, in my view, a deeper and more nuanced position. Regarding Rovelli's objection, the Kantian perspective becomes illuminating. It provides the appropriate tools to understand the deeper meaning of the QBist position. The point that Rovelli seems to overlook in his argument is that when a subject is observed and thus becomes, in turn, an object within the nature being described, it is always another agent, a human subject that carries out the observation. Kant pays particular attention to this adjective. The Kantian transcendental subject is a specifically human subject and, as such, represents all possible agents and all possible descriptions of reality. Similarly, the subject referred to by QBism must be understood as a general subject, not merely as a single determinate agent. Okay, so now we've got a collective humanity that exists across all humans. Okay, but that's a little bit nuts, because the idea that like I am going to be experiencing the world exactly like other people is a little bit rough. Now, of course, we all share the reality, but the idea that we're assuming from the get-go that everything is the same for all the people is a little bit idealistic. Again, incompatible with the theory of evolution. Good point. Not everyone is going to have the same biology. And that's like by definition almost. And also evolutionarily supported, but by definition because of evolution. Okay. It is an agent with specific and defined cognitive capacities common to the human species. This aligns with the fact that again, like see that? You just called it. If you have to reference species, you're pulling in evolutionary biology, and that is going to bring in trouble, or like it'll bring in messiness at least. You agree that there is an array? Fair. Like, yeah, maybe you could have an array or something. Viper says there had to be a first consciousness which defined everything, but what did that consciousness evolve from if there was no universe to evolve in? Again, that would be beyond what they want to say. Okay. This aligns with the fact that in QBism, experience is the only criterion of reality. However, it is important to note that QBism itself does not offer a definitive stance on whether the agent should be conceived in this general transcendental sense or as an individual empirical subject. While proponents like Fuchs tend to emphasize the role of a single agent in making probabilistic assessments, others like Bitbol have explored a more Kantian or phenomenological reading. In this view, on the one hand, objectivity is based on intersubjective agreement among agents, and on the other, knowledge must be considered limited. It is precisely because the type of epistemic mediation is made up of shared patterns that are repeated in every observer that one can talk about cognitive limits. Again, so they're making claims that we have some generalized statistical patterns that we all see. And like I get that. Like we do all have to have some sort of baseline statistical patterns that we can recognize. Now, does that perfectly align somehow with the world or with like science or us? How that all happens seems complicated, but I get that like this isn't the craziest thought, that we have to be able to at least have some sort of statistical overlap between humans, like in what we observe, even if it's not the same. Okay, these limits are such because they are human in general, and the relativity of the point of view must be understood as inherent to the species. Yeah, again, inherent to the species. I'm trying to make it like at least as probabilistic, and so it'll smooth out over the people, but like they need that species thing. From this perspective, a Kantian reading of QBism offers a compelling way to respond to Rovelli's critique. If the agent is understood as a general cognitive structure rather than just a particular empirical observer, then the risk of solipsism and extreme idealism is mitigated. Or did you just define yourself out of the problem because you're saying it's not just one, everyone's exactly the same? It's not, this is not the best solution here. It's basically defining yourself out of the problem. But okay. This reading clarifies why the QBist framework, despite its subjectivist formulation, does not collapse into a purely mental construction of reality. In this sense, if the QBist observer is understood analogously to the transcendental subject, thus if one considers that the agent is always a human agent, Ravelli's objection is weakened precisely because it is based on the idea of a single determinate observer experiencing the world, and who, as a single entity, would not observe all that is observable. Quantum last Thursdayism, yeah. Yeah, quantum entanglement better explains intersubjectivity. Yeah, I don't know how that works though, QQ. Like, I got that, like, there's a theory there, but I don't know it, so that's the problem. Sock now says this forcing species being onto Kant, like I'm shaking my head over here. Yeah, it's a very Kantian sort of thing. QQ says, but yeah, it will be solipsistic. I don't see the problem here. Yeah, and see, that's the thing. I feel like this is a bullet that the proponents of QBism are willing to bite. And so it's just like, okay, this is just how it's going to go. And that's part of the theory. Maybe they're right. It's not going to work for everybody, but this is just part of, like, you're going to have a big theory of things, a big old metaphysics is how the world actually is. There's going to be a few bullets that not everyone's going to be happy about biting. Okay. Indeed, if it is true that the epistemic possibilities of the single subject are limited to their particular point of view, what remains for them to observe is nothing other than what has been observed by other agents. If, therefore, the observer is understood as human and endowed with certain epistemic capacities, quote, all that is observable, end quote, becomes all that human species can observe. From this perspective, imagining a viewpoint that considers the human species as an object, as Rovelli suggests, becomes logically impossible. It is appropriate in this sense to emphasize the idea of the possibility of experience. It is certainly true that if I observe an observer, I can see things that the observer does not see, and thus there is more in the universe than what is accessible to a specific agent, but this does not imply that one can observe a human general subject from an external perspective, seeing things that they do not see. In other words, by experience, one must not mean the actual experience of a single agent in a determined context, but the experience available to the latter as possible, that is, as a potential for a human subject. Yeah, so it's a projected subject across all rational beings, and that is what the human subject actually sees. Okay. The QBist observer then is not external to nature, but precisely because they are part of it and cannot step outside of it, they provide a subjective description and cannot do otherwise. This subjectivity must be understood as a universal Kantian subjectivity and certainly cannot be bracketed, since a subject may appear as a mere phenomenal object to another subject. If the observer were external to nature, they would be able to see themselves acting in the world. It is certainly true that any single observer can be observed, and that a determined subject can provide a description of a system that includes another observer who in turn behaves as an object. Nevertheless, it does not become possible to step outside the human perspective to core, which every simple agent describes as partly subjective and largely intersubjective, and to observe the human perspective on the world from a third-person point of view. In other words, the knowing subject experiencing nature cannot simultaneously observe and see themselves observing the world. Sock says, like Marx has more connections with the species being than Kant, because Kant is not testing the human. He is merely showing the possibility that there might be existence. Yeah, well, you probably know more about Kant and Marx than I do, Sock. So it's like, I'll take your word for it. Has the author ever heard of a mirror? I don't know. I don't know, Vipers. That's a great question. But like, yeah, it's the idea of the species, or like the human-wide cognition, is very kind of funky. Species being is from Aristotle generally. Okay. QQ says, suppose there's a system that states in 0 and 1, some observer O measure is a system, and your friend is this O prime, and then you can, O can describe system S, and O a quantum system, S cross O. S describes superposition as some formula, make an observation system O, then you move on from this one to that one. So what you were measuring in the system, you agree with O. Yeah, I get that. Like, you can. This is like there's a sort of a hop, a transitivity on this sort of thing. I get that. And that is how you sort of get everything, because you are postulating that you can do transitivity across people. Like, I see something, you see something, and we all kind of see it. And now, even though I didn't see it, it's what I see specifically doesn't matter. It's just this sort of like amalgamation of all the human thought. That's okay. But like, it's, again, you have to make a lot of assumptions about human observers to do that sort of thing. Energy says, interpretations of quantum physics which emphasize the relative significance of observation and properties of quantum systems more closely align with Occam's razor than interpretations like pilot wave theory or many worlds interpretation, since they posit unobserved entities plus observed entities, which are more entities than just observed entities. Yeah, and I think our buddy Ivan makes that point a lot, is why he doesn't like pilot wave and some of the other ones. Yeah, and he says he doesn't like them either because you have to make a lot of the same assumptions on all the theories, and those other ones make further claims. And so the Bayesian sort of approach, I guess, works better there. I mean, I'm just afraid, I guess, is that it's gone too far idealistic. You're losing the world. Then you're too epistemic, you're too idealistic, you're going to lose some of the world in taking this position. And I can be wrong about these sort of things. So it's like, I get it. Like, no theory's perfect, and this is a big theory of like everything in physics. So like, it's gonna be complicated and not so obvious. Okay, what then is the role of determinate? 1 second, more water. But you can see why I said I got to start a little early. We're at 2.5 hours of this stuff reading this, and my brain starts to go into mush. Q says we can see ourselves and experience ourselves, but we don't see infinity amount of branches. Yeah. Yep. Energy says Ivan believes many worlds, which in my view involves more entities, multiple worlds that are necessary to align with the mount, so it doesn't align with Occam's razor. Yeah, so I think Ivan likes, and I hate to put words into his mouth, but he likes the many worlds because it does have lots of worlds, but that's all it has. It has no other problems. Now, if you're going to say, all right, that falls into stuff you can't view in QBism here, and that's fine. So it'd be like the many worlds, but you just can't talk about them is what's going on, and you've still got the probability laws the same in sort of the probabilistic understanding of the world. So it's very similar. You're just saying you can't talk about the many worlds in this one. Yeah. It's a lot of pages, but we're getting there. Okay. So what then is the role of the determinate agent in QBism and Kantianism? Every single observer possesses, so to speak, a slice of reality. The latter, as in Cubist paintings, consists of the convergence of every slice, subjective and personal. The non-falsifiable world is one we're looking for, I wish. Henry says, no, Occam's razor about probability, so you can only get so far in a heuristic epistemology. Yeah, stuff gets complicated. I don't know enough about it to really speak authoritatively about any of this. Thanks to universal cognitive structures, again, I can talk about that shit though, because this is straight up philosophy. Thanks to universal cognitive structures, the human species composes a common picture that aligns with what is considered objective reality. It is, however, impossible to step outside this picture. The fragments provided by each particular and determinate description constitute a single world reflected in intersubjective experience. Considering the general observer or the transcendental subject as the starting point before any discourse about the world does not mean failing to see them as part of the world, but precisely the opposite. In fact, the very reasoning that includes the agent within nature is formulated by the knowing subject who remains the only a priori guaranteed in any kind of speculation or physical theory. As Michela Massimi writes in her article Points of View, Kant on Perspectival Knowledge, quote, knowledge is never from God's eye view, but is instead from a human vantage point, end quote. And it is only intersubjective agreement that allows for, quote, providing the shared perspectival standpoint where individual scientific judgments can be evaluated, proved true, and retained or withdrawn accordingly, end quote. Okay, we got to it. We got to the end. So now what we do is we rate the paper, and if you are in chat, you are welcome to rate. You get to use the better TTV emotes that you can see. If you don't see them, you just see text. We'll see it on stream, but like in your chat, you get to pick, you can use them just by putting installing one of the plugins. But anyway, Please rate the work. If you thought it was fun and had some good ideas, give it a brain dance or multiple brain dances. As energy, thank you. 3 brain dances, and Luminance liked it also and gave it a yay. You thought it talked about existential or artistic drama, or sometimes social. Nog Scream, I don't think we got into too much of that, maybe a little. Nog Oro for deeper ancient ideas, for you give an Ouroboros. Nog Knife for slicing and dicing arguments. Nog Navel, navel gazing only for academics. Nog Turd, all style, no substance, still poop underneath. And Nog Grapes for big claims that shrivel up. You can also use the global vote yay and vote nay of Twitch, and also my vote meh for things that are very meh. Note, I calculate an overall score. Anything in the green makes the score go up, anything in the red makes it go down, and the meh makes it go to the middle. QQ said meh. Energy liked it. Yeah, so Luminance says he's a little bit grad student-ish in the sense it's more like there's Kantianism and there's subjective Bayesianism. What if we put them together? Yeah, it does read like a mash 'em up, and that's fair. That's not necessarily bad. It's just, okay, this is like the Kantian perspective on QBism. And that's not it's not overly ambitious, but then again, it doesn't claim to be either. Unreal says, I'm sure that if I understood more of this, I would disagree with it, but it was enough above my head that I'll pass in judgment. Fine. Watcher of Games, thank you for the yay. Viper says, so if we were able to create a device that manipulated gray matter in a way that created concrete belief installed in everyone's brains, we could all become Jedi and use the Force. Hell, it's probabilistic, so you'd only need to install on 51% people. Yeah, it'd be like, what's it called? Like everyone wearing the 3D reality goggles, and if you could change it on everybody, then no one would everyone thought a wall was there, so no one would walk that way, and you could just block off reality. Kind of like you were saying about the video game Matrix, where now if the Matrix, you could, futz with it, like you were saying, the gray matter in our heads, and that would be our reality at that point. So I think that's exactly right. Lumen says, so it doesn't feel groundbreaking, but I thought it was interesting enough to listen to. Appreciate you sticking around. Yeah, it wasn't bad. It wasn't badly, poorly written. It wasn't trying to bite off too much, but that's okay. Yeah, you don't have to do you don't have to be a crazy, make crazy claims for stuff, but they did an okay job, I guess. Thank you for the shout to Luminance. Rod gave it a brain dance and a math. Thank you. Viper says those 49 are going to be really freaked out. Yep. Luminance gave it a brain dance, an Oro, and a knife. Yep. Frost says, I'm surprised how much of it I was able to follow, but then I got lost. It happens. But that's what it is. There are some good ideas in these areas that, physicists and philosophers have tried to come up with. Sock said a yay, a knife, and a turd. Yep. Vipers gave it 3 navel gazings, 3 turds, 3 grapes, and 3 nays. That is a lot of poor ratings. I think Vipers didn't like it. Lumen says the response to Rovelli seems worthwhile. Vipers hate it. Doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Okay, not for Vipers then. Lumen says thanks for the shout out. If Vipers has opinions, yes he does. Lumen says, I feel like I need to put more to counteract Vipers. You can if you want. It's fine. I'm kind of in the meh area too. I don't hate it, but it feels like you have to be to like it, you have to have some Kantian leanings already, and I don't. So this is just this is not an essay for me. Okay, you're gonna just counteract Vipers now. So we're having a meta discussion on what the rating should be. Yeah, some yays. QQ says, I think better understand QBism through Berkeley view and information theory, not Kantianism. Okay, yeah, maybe there are better ways to go about this. I'm just finding it kind of meh. Well, where am I typing? I hope I didn't fuck anything up. Vote meh. I'm gonna give it a meh. I think they did a good job making it accessible. I think that's fair. But yeah, it's we'll go with this because it gets a turd. And maybe a knife for the argumentation. So it's I'm kind of split on this one. Just kind of split. But if you want to read an introduction to this, I don't think it fucked anything up that badly. But like I was saying, there's a lot of uncomfortable arguments in this area. Lumen says, I think the author hasn't read Hegel and doesn't know they're actually a Hegelian, not a Kantian. Well, Lumens, I think that's a lot of people don't understand Hegel. And we are I've said this multiple times. We're still in Hegel still has a lot of stuff to offer, and we're not really understood all Hegel's philosophy yet. So I think a lot of that is doing it. That's why you put the knife in the poop. Yep, exactly. So, yeah. Viper says, our usual understanding matter than life, then consciousness, then agent, but QBism says agent, then measurement, then physics, biology, then the story of matter, and hand waving around is not sufficient explanation. It's a logical brick wall. It is not for Vipers. But, like, again, if you take your, like, Vipers, you're not an idealist in this way, at least. If you say, okay, you're going to just be an idealistic theory and you're going to bite that bullet, starting off with the agent then is like the accepted point of view in an idealistic theory. I know they don't say they are idealists. They're saying, oh, this is a measured realism or measured empiricism. They can, you know, it's full of shit. It's a kind of idealism as far as I'm concerned. So it's like, yes, but once you bite that bullet, then yeah, agent, then measurement, then physics. Yeah, that's how it goes. That's exactly right. So it's like, if you're going to be on that side of philosophy anyway, like, that's not a problem. Luminous gave him another brain dance. Yeah. QQ's, I think even Hegel doesn't understand himself because he isn't absolute spirit. I've told this story multiple times. I took a Hegel course when I was an undergrad, and there was a passage, and it was with a Hegel scholar. The teacher was a Hegelian Hegel scholar. And someone asks Professor Klaus Brinkmann, could you explain this? I don't really get it. I don't think it makes sense. And says, Klaus Brinkmann considers carefully, and he walks slowly all around the room. He makes a full loop. He goes, the day before Hegel died, two men understood Hegel and God. And then Hegel died. And it was just to say, we don't understand. No one does. That's it. Lumen says spirit in Hegel means like the spirit of the age. So everyone's together knowledge. That's a good one. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not attempting to say what Hegel does. But anyway, if anyone else wants to get their rating in, now's the time. Like, okay. But otherwise, I will then drop you off somewhere else to go on Twitch. Adam says, quantum electrodynamics in this world are somewhat not measured. And I say I don't know what emergence meant, but theoretical entities are conceptually inferred emergent zero mass, but are not fundamental to quantum physics. And it's inferred that the billions of MOSFET transistors in a type of superio rendering process at the atomic level, the opinions between quarks and the electrons are emergent. So scientific realism and theoretical entities are real, yet non-fundamental. Yeah, so I'm not denying that the term emergent gets used all over the place and in different ways. The philosophy surrounding it, Adam, is not great. It's a lot of times just a dodge saying this happened. We don't really understand why, but this is what happens. So it's like, okay, yeah, I get it. I get like we're trying to explain stuff and we don't have all the answers, but that's not a philosophically like well-described situation. Yeah, thank you, Illuminance, for a scream. Unreal says, God, to be honest, I have no idea without God was talking about either. Yeah, no one knows. Talks this is why it's better to be in the Marx camp. We see Hegel in a more practical way. True. Okay, so that was responding to Adam. Viper says, an idealistic theory means that it's still a valid theory if you just ignore logic and unequivocally proves it wrong. Yes, because there's a lot of idealists out there, and we don't have everything worked out, Vipers. There's problems on both sides of the spectrum. They're not the same, and you kind of pick your poison sometimes. And you know, like, we don't have everything figured out. We are always picking one poison over another. We're always making concessions. You pick a camp, pick a team, something. We don't have everything. So it's like, I get that it's like shitty stuff that you have to sometimes bite the bullet, but that is part of being a philosopher, is you bite the bullet sometimes, and you're just like, yeah, that's how it is. Like this is like the limit of what I can argue for.